Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show, or the Dorian Weather Show, really, on this Friday, the 30th of August, 2019. And you can see on the screen here, you got half of me, and you also have Dorian, which is really getting that signature look that a major hurricane gets, that symmetrical look to it. It has an extremely well-defined core. It's had that well-defined core pretty much from the onset, and it has held together. It carried it through certain points in its life cycle where a storm might otherwise have weakened, and it helped it to strengthen and strengthen rather quickly. It's been on a strengthening trend all day long today. This loop, by the way, is courtesy of Rick on my Patreon page from North Carolina, who sent me the link a few minutes ago, and I figured I'd bring it up. The actual picture can be found on the University of Wisconsin website, I believe, and it's very, very impressive. This is the enhanced satellite view, and I'm going to go to a shot of it in a moment. I'll bring it up on the screen here. I'm going to just let me move this around. There's a couple of things I want to say from the onset that I think are really important, and that is please, please, please. There's a lot of stuff that's flying around on the internet. A lot happened today in terms of weather models and weather maps and the GFS and the European and the ICON and the NAM and everything else that you might hear, or maps being thrown onto social media, or taking one computer run of one particular model and using it as Bible. Let me make this very clear. You do not use, if you find these models, they're all available, they're all on the internet. If you see these model maps, you don't use those maps to make decisions, okay? That is not a good idea at all. Many of these models, they all have flaws in them. They need to be interpreted, and you might not be in a position to do that. The National Hurricane Center's official forecast is the map that you should look at, and your sources for information regarding making any kind of decisions have to go to your local National Weather Service office, your local officials who know your area much better than I do, certainly, or for that matter, the friend you might have heard the rumor from, and also the National Hurricane Center's website itself. So those are your tools that you should be using and should be looking at. So let's get going tonight, because we have a lot to cover here, and I'm going to bring that satellite view back up on the screen, because on this page here, I can get it to move a little bit faster so you can see the motion. Now, there's an Air Force reconnaissance aircraft flying into the eye right now. So as we go through our show tonight, we'll be looking at reports and seeing what they find. Interestingly enough, as the loop reloads, look at the eye look how circular it is. It's very well defined for sure, and the core also. It's not there yet, but whenever you get these storms, when they strengthen to Category 4s and beyond, to Category 5, they get that what I call the buzzsaw look. It looks like a blade on a buzzsaw, and you can watch it on a satellite loop. You can literally see that rolling along. Two great examples of the buzzsaw look. If you go back a couple of years ago and look at satellite loops of hurricanes Irma and Maria, Maria in particular, when it was going into Puerto Rico, really looked like a buzzsaw. So this storm, in my view, is going to get to a Category 4 at the very least. Whether it gets to a 5 really kind of depends on the microclimate conditions over where the hurricane moves over. The water temperatures are certainly supportive. The upper air is supportive. Sometimes it could be subtleties that we don't know about that cause a storm to get there to that Category 5 threshold, and other times There are also little things that are going on that might prevent it from happening, but certainly it wouldn't be a shocker to me if it did wind up getting that strong at some point in its life cycle. I'm not saying that it's going to be that way when it makes landfall. There are other complications that take place when it approaches land. How fast is it moving? If you have a slow-moving hurricane approaching land, what will happen is that as part of the circulation begins to move over land, the hurricane itself, its circulation is going to get somewhat distorted, and as a result, you're going to wind up seeing some weakening. So if you could have a very strong hurricane, you can have a Category 4 approaching the coast. It gets within 100 miles to the coast. If it's moving at a crawl, it's far more likely that it will weaken some before it makes landfall as opposed to holding its strength. So just bear that in mind. There's all these little nuances that you have to contend with when it comes to these tropical systems. So as I did mention right off the bat that you should be using the National Hurricane Center's forecast map. This is the latest forecast map based on the 5 o'clock advisory from the Hurricane Center. If you're plotting it on a map, 25.0 north, 70.7 west. Top winds are 115 miles an hour, and it's moving west-northwest at 9. So it is bending back a bit more westerly. We could follow the eye in its motion this afternoon. It was pretty clear that it was beginning to make the turn. Now, that turn to the west-northwest seems to be occurring a little bit faster than what was forecast by at least a few hours, maybe a little bit more, but that might make a difference down the road in terms of where it ultimately winds up. And you'll notice that it's kept as a major hurricane all the way through. The Hurricane Center does have it going to a 4. We have tropical storm warnings up for all of the northwestern Bahamas with the exception of Andros Island. Andros Island is under a hurricane watch. So you've got warnings for the northwest Bahamas, a watch for Andros Island. There are no watches up for Florida at this time because the landfall has been pushed back to sometime maybe late Tuesday morning based on this forecast, where the Hurricane Center has it just inland of the coast, probably somewhere, it looks like it might be north of Deerfield Beach and West Palm Beach as a major hurricane, and then turning northward in that process. So by 2 p.m. Wednesday, it has it approaching Jacksonville, but literally riding right along or just inland of the coast. And the model subtleties late today are such that you can't, the margin of error is too large where you can't put your faith in one particular model with regards to making a decision. The Hurricane Center has got their forecast. They will go to watches certainly, and at some point warnings, and there will be, for those of you that might be watching along the coastal East Florida, that you may have to make decisions based on this. So again, it's your local officials, the Weather Service, and the Hurricane Center as far as making the decisions that you need to make to protect life and property. Now here's the actual public advisory, which is all available on the Hurricane Center's website. 25 north, 70 west. You get all the pertinent information, where the watches and warnings are, and a long discussion. But I just wanted to bring that up so that everyone can see it. Not all of you may know that you have access to this. nhc.noaa.gov is the National Hurricane Center's website. Now here's the satellite, the wide view, and there are a few things going on here. We have an upper low that is moving into the northwest Caribbean, and eventually we'll get into the southwest Gulf of Mexico. That is having an impact here. So is the what appears to be also an upper low that is to the east of Dorian, where you see those other clouds east of Dorian. And Dorian is in its spot in between. The upper low to the west that is moving westward is creating a very, very strong outflow setup, so that for Dorian, which is favorable for strengthening. And the upper low to the east is far enough east where it's not impacting Dorian with regards to any kind of wind shear. But you look at this and you see it's just how impressive Mother Nature can be. And yet at the same time, we're talking about a storm whose gales only go out 100 miles to the north and a little less than 100 miles to the south. Now, we may see that wind field expand a bit as it gets closer to the coast, but for now, it's a rather intact, quote-unquote, small type of storm geographically. During today, when we looked at some of the hurricane tracking model guidance, and hopefully, well, I don't know, we probably won't have the new one. Usually that comes out a little bit after 8 o'clock unless we really go long today. But the model track guidance has shifted a little bit further to the east. You'll notice that the cluster of models brings the storm inland, just inland along the east coast of Florida, and then moves it north-northeast parallel to the coast all the way up. Now, we do have a few outliers, including one that takes it straight west-northwest and then westward across the entire state, only to take a sharp right turn and then go northeastward, back the other way, and then out to the northeast. That's a very interesting path were it to verify. And it's not the kind of path that I would forecast, given what's going on there. You have a couple that actually keep it pretty far out, making a broad recurvature. A few of them eventually bring it up into South Carolina or ride it up the Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina coast. So there are some other possibilities to deal with in the longer term after it's done with Florida, and we'll deal with that. We'll deal with those in our discussion tonight. Now here's the Hurricane Hunter plane is in there, and it's made its first pass through the center. You can see where the wind barbs are. I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you, so you can take a closer look with respect to the winds. Now, the white wind barbs are winds in excess of, they are 196 knots to 113 knots. So you have on the northwest quadrant, the plane did find winds in excess of 100 knots. You have, that's 115 miles an hour, and you've got those, that's when you see the double flags. One flag is 50 knots, two flags is 100. And on the southeastern quadrant, we've got winds of 3 wind barbs, so 3 wind reports, 2 of 100 and 1 that looks to be either 105 or 110 knots. So we'll come back to this to see when they put a pressure print on it, to see what kind of pressure they measured when they made that pass through the eye. So they're going to be busy for the next hour, and we'll come back and we'll see what's happening. So that's pretty much the lead in, and we're going to take a look at a couple of the models that ran this afternoon. And we're going to start with the GFS model. This is the late afternoon GFS run. What's happening at this point is you're seeing models basically tighten up. When you go, when you're looking at something out 5, 6, 7 days in advance, think of a megaphone, narrow at one end and wide at the other end. As you go out further in time, there's more and more variability, more and more possibilities of different outcomes, all depending on strength and timing of small, medium, and large disturbances in the atmosphere that are running around. And models don't virtually all of the time in the long range do not get a good feel or a good grasp of the strength of a lot of these of different disturbances. But as we get closer and closer to the shorter range, we get closer to say the day 5, it begins to figure out, okay, this short wave is more important than that short wave. And then, of course, when you get even inside the day 5 time frame, it really gets super tight with regards to which systems are going to be important and in terms of the timing and everything else. So we're kind of getting closer to that point where the possibilities are getting narrowed down. And we saw tracks by the global models, at least, that were a lot closer and matched up fairly well. The European and the GFS today, the late GFS in particular, are relatively close in their tracks. Now, the GFS is moving it west-northwest or slightly north of due west at one point. This is Sunday evening. At Sunday evening, it's at 77.5 west. The Florida coastline due west of that is at 80.5. So it's centered at about 180 miles to the east of the Florida coastline. This is Sunday evening, okay? Let me make sure I got that straight. Sunday evening. It's about 180 miles away. Monday evening, it's now at roughly 78, about almost a 79 west to a little over 80 west. So it's now only about 60 or 70 miles offshore. It takes the better part of 18 hours to bring it to just about to the coastline. It's moving at a crawl, and the reason why it slows down almost to a crawl is because at this point, the upper air steering, and we talked about this yesterday, that no man's land between the upper high to the east and the upper high to the west and the jet stream to the north, there's a zone in the middle where the upper air steering winds are very light. And when they get in there, they crawl. And in some cases, like we saw in the case of Florence last year or in Harvey a couple of years ago, those are situations where sometimes you get storms to stall out for a period of time. Eventually, they'll respond to something in the atmosphere that'll kick it along. But in that no man's land, it stalls to a crawl. And being that apparently the models are signaling the idea that the ridge that is driving it to the west now is building, but it may not be as strong as what the models saw just a couple of days ago. So in which case, you're dealing with a storm that is slowing down, potentially stalling, and for perhaps a short period of time until it starts to make a move maybe more toward the north, which is what both those models did. And that's what we're seeing here on the late afternoon GFS. Once it gets to the coast, it begins to move a bit up the coast and running up to about just east of Jacksonville by Wednesday evening. And if you look up to the north, that stripe of green that runs from Massachusetts southwest to Kentucky, that's a cold front. So we have some kind of system moving in the flow that's coming out of that northern jet stream that is moving from west to east. It's bringing a cool high down into Wisconsin. That is a mechanism now that is pulling it to the north. That trough is going to move out, and there's going to be probably a second shortwave trough that is going to swing around and pick it up and lift it up to the northeast. The GFS's track is literally rides the entire coastline, if this is correct, from Florida through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, with the center literally just on or just off the coast, inside the Outer Banks, off the coast near Elizabeth City, and then running on up to the northeast from there toward Nova Scotia. A large margin of error exists here, folks. This is day 5. You know my rules about after day 5. This track could be further west, could be further east. This is the late afternoon model's snapshot view of what it thinks it will happen, what it thinks will happen. And right now, I'm fairly confident about the point up to here. After that, I'm not sure. That the point where we start to see it really slow down to a crawl and making the turn, that is, I'm still, there's a high degree of uncertainty about this. The Hurricane Center admits as much in their discussion, and the uncertainties have probably grown a little wider given some of the movements with the models during this afternoon. But this is, again, we know we've been talking about the general flavor of how all of this is going to play out meteorologically. It's not meteorology to look at one model run and suddenly it becomes the one that you marry yourself to, particularly when we're here at Friday and we're talking about something that is going to happen for Tuesday. So you want to be really careful, and you, as I said earlier, these are not maps that you use to make decisions. So let's go to the upper air, so we can watch what's happening. And in the layers of the atmosphere, the upper layers that are steering all of this. Now, I backed this up to Wednesday because I want you to look at the northern part of that jet stream. The winds blowing west to east. That line that you see there, it's hard to see the number, but if you follow the line, the height line, that runs across Oregon and Idaho, down through northeastern Colorado, down through Arkansas to Georgia, then makes a little turn south to North Carolina and out to sea. The winds are blowing west to east. That is the southern end of the jet stream, the northern part of the jet stream. And those upper air winds get stronger as you go north into the area that's shaded in blue, from the Dakotas down into Illinois and Indiana, and then on up through northwest PA and southwestern New York State. That's the strongest part of the jet stream, is further north. But that entire area north of northern South Carolina, northern Georgia, Alabama, the winds are blowing from west to east. This was back just 2 days ago. What we're seeing with that northern jet continues to be what we have seen all summer long. Shortwave troughs moving along, the jet stream dips southward, then the trough lifts out into eastern Canada, the jet stream pulls out northward, and then another shortwave trough comes along behind it. That's what we have right now. So we have this whole trough pulling out, going into this weekend, and you look down now near Florida, I'll back it up, and you see that little finger that sticks its nose toward the South Carolina coast. That is the upper ridge in the Atlantic that's building back westward. It seems to reach its peak intensity tomorrow morning. There's still some semblance of it there on Sunday morning. So somewhere between Sunday and Monday morning, it peaks out and then starts to weaken a little bit. And this is where the European, and you see the representation, the upper representation of Dorian in the Bahamas on Sunday, and also slows it down. Now, at this point, the ridge in the Atlantic has kind of weakened and pulled a little bit to the east. You've got another upper high that is sitting in Colorado and in northern New Mexico, and there's a shortwave trough here on Monday that is running, a weak one, that is running down right along 80 degrees west from western New York, western PA, down through West Virginia into North Carolina. So the northern part of the jet stream dips down into southernmost North Carolina. It's creating there's a weakness there off the southeast coast that Dorian is responding to, but the flow is very weak, so it doesn't move very much between Monday and Tuesday morning. Between Monday and Tuesday morning in the northern jet, take a look in the Dakotas, you suddenly have another shortwave trough there. So there's more energy coming down in that, and now it becomes an issue of timing. These northern strength, these northern shortwaves coming down with varying amounts of strength are going to have impact on Dorian as it gains a little bit of latitude. And now, according to the European anyway, by the time we get to Wednesday, that northern trough is picking up Dorian and moving it up to the north. The Atlantic ridge is building back a bit. It's riding along the western periphery of that Atlantic ridge. And this is Wednesday morning where we have it just offshore. The European, it's the GFS we just looked at, has it tracking just inland of the coast. The European has it tracking just barely offshore the coast. The models are very similar. They're probably about 30 to 40 miles apart, maybe at most 60, with regards to the placement. But they basically do the same thing. And that shortwave trough moves into eastern Canada. By the time we get, this is for Thursday, then by the time we get to Friday, as that first trough pulls out, apparently another shortwave is getting ready to drop in near Lake Superior. That picks this up and punts it away to the northeast, but it brings it fairly close to southeastern New England, if this is correct. The GFS, same idea. The only difference is that it is a little. It's in a position where the trough in the north is much weaker. That short wave is much weaker on the GFS than it is on the European, so you have a bit of a flatter look to things, and the system that is Dorian gets ejected out more east-northeast. It's not a huge amount of miles, but if you were in line with this, that 50 or 60 miles could certainly make a difference, and it does make a huge difference if it were with respect to down in Florida and maybe eventually for Georgia, South, and North Carolina. This is where you might want to say, okay, let's rule out the possibility that it could go west and go into the Gulf of Mexico. I think the odds of that happening are pretty low at this point, but I just want to show you that the icon model, which some people say has behaved fairly well at times. It has its moments, like any other model. There's no one model that you could look at as gospel. Otherwise, there would be no point to doing any kind of weather forecasting. You could just look at a model and that would be that. I don't think we're going to come to that point in our lifetime. But if you watch the icon model actually has the system the upper low system that is in the northwestern Caribbean goes into the western Gulf and a surface low forms. We talked about that yesterday. And the icon puts a much more importance on this than the other models have. The other thing is, if you look to the east, there's actually another little system that it develops well to the east of Dorian. So you've got these three systems here on the icon model, and it actually takes Dorian right across southernmost Florida into the Gulf before it starts to turn. And this is as far out as it goes, day 5, where it's moving up the west coast of Florida. So look, if you're an icon lover, you would, and someone who just basically wants to look at a model and decide that that's what they're going to decide, that's what they're going to go with from a forecast. That's what you would do with this. You would forecast it to go into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, my suspicion is we don't have a similar upper air chart to look at the upper air, but I'll bring up a variation of it. And if you look at the icon model, there are a couple of things that are different. For one thing, the icon has Dorian almost to the coast by midday Monday. So it doesn't slow down and stall it. It has a stronger ridge off the southeast coast. And it also, with the short wave that's in the east on Monday, you'll notice that instead of having that last line, that 588 height line, the southern edge of the westerly winds is in the upper atmosphere is across Virginia, as opposed to getting down to the North-South Carolina border. Makes a huge difference. If it's got a stronger ridge and a weaker shortwave trough there in the east with the jet stream, it is going to force this to move further to the west. And that is the icon model's view. And even with the shortwave that follows as we go into Wednesday, it is also not nearly as far south with it. So if the other two global models are overdoing those northern shortwave troughs, you may see them come up with slightly different solutions in the subsequent runs that follow overnight and tomorrow. But you have to work with what's in front of you. In my view, nothing has really changed with respect to what the factors are. We've been talking about that ridge off the east coast for days now. The northern part of the jet stream, all those players are there. That all has remained the same. Now, as we get closer in time, we're seeing how they come together as far as a solution is concerned. And here's the European, by the way, on its surface map. I don't know if I show you so many maps. Sometimes I get confused and I forget which ones I've shown you. I think I showed you the upper air before, but this is the surface in 24-hour increments, so that's why you see the bigger jumps. But there's Dorian by Sunday morning moving into the northeastern Bahamas. By Monday morning, it's not even into the northwestern Bahamas, so it's already slowed to a crawl. And Tuesday morning, I mean, literally from here to here, just to do a quick calculation, so 78.3 Monday morning, and by Tuesday morning, it's at 79.3. It's moved 60 miles in 24 hours. Okay, that's less than 3 miles an hour. Now, if this materializes, there are going to be serious implications with regards to tidal flooding, multiple high tide cycles, surges. You've got north of the center, you're going to have prolonged easterly winds, water piling on, and I honestly don't know, with not knowing the topography and how the whole marine. I mean, I've been to Florida many times, but there are certain factors with tidal flooding coming in the back bay, in the bays, with certain wind directions. And that's something that your local officials can talk about and your local forecasters can talk about. I can't really address those things. But if you're going to be dealing with a storm that's going to be moving at a snail's pace and approaching your coastline, that is certainly a big consideration that forecasters are going to be taking into account. So your local forecasters are going to be able to give you the right information, and that's, I guess, what I'm getting at is, go to somebody reputable. Make sure that you are getting information from people who really know. As I said, the Weather Service, your local officials, et cetera, they should be front and center here, and try to shy away from all the other things that you see running around on social media and the internet, and maps, just snapshots of certain maps, and no explanation that goes on behind it. I do have one other model to show you, and that's the HMON model. This is a model that really just appeared, I think, a year or two ago, and it's supposed to be good with intensity. Now, when you look at this particular model on this map, the storm stays centered in the middle. It's the geography that moves. And it is supposed to, as I said, intensity is its strong suit. And it does have Dorian with pressures down in the 950s and 940s as it moves, and even into the 930s as it moves to the Bahamas and then heads to the Florida coast. And by the way, these are 3-hourly increments. I'm going to run it back. But you can see toward the end of this run, it's not completely done yet. It's only out to 111 hours. And if you believe this, okay, it's approaching South Florida here on Monday, all right? It never, ever brings the center onto the coast. It's moving it up offshore, parallel to the coastline on its track. But I will just also warn you that this model late yesterday evening, when I looked at it, took Dorian in the Florida Straits, and it was headed for the Keys. So again, not a useful tool with regards to taking something just on one run. Let's go back to the reconnaissance aircraft. Let's see if they made a swing. They're about to make a swing around. We do have a pressure 951 millibars. So clearly, Dorian has been strengthening rapidly since this afternoon. The recon that was used for the 2 o'clock advisory, I believe, was 970. So it's down 19 millibars in roughly 5 hours' time. So it's deepening at a rate of 19 millibars in 5 hours. That's almost 4 millibars an hour. That is exceptional deepening that is going on. So we are in a rapid deepening phase here. Where it ends, where the deepening phase ends, we're not sure. But this is really impressive to see a pressure fall of that particular magnitude. So I'm going to go to a couple of other maps and then come to the chat board in a moment. But let's go to, I want to pull up, I haven't really looked at it, so I'm going to look at it with you for the first time today, and that is the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, which we like to use to look at, because these guys usually have a pretty good sense of what's going to happen in general. And you can see their 7-day rainfall map has the max rain areas over Florida with that yellow hatched area of 10 inches or more coming inland, just north of, say, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and going inland toward Lake Okeechobee, and then northward. It's a narrow strip inland, so I guess they're thinking that the center does make landfall, if barely, and then you can see the extension of the heavy rains going all the way up through coastal Georgia, South Carolina, into southwestern North Carolina. Then it starts to tail a little bit further to the east of the Outer Banks. So it kind of buys the idea of it approaching the Florida coast, straddling the coastline up from Florida right through the southeast, and then northeastward from there. And if you are in the northeast, of course, you see the finger of dry weather, relatively speaking, because the rainfall amounts in the green are generally a tenth to a quarter of an inch over the next 7 days. And the bulk of that is going to come probably on Wednesday of next week when the next cold front approaches. So WPC is certainly suggesting something that the way the models have drawn the maps today, this is how they looked at this when this map was put out this evening. So they got to look at everything today. I'm not 100% sure. Sometimes when you read the discussions, they don't always get to look at the most latest run, the most latest model runs when they do their forecast. I'm not quite sure why that is, but oftentimes I'll see that they they're using the overnight models, the overnight model runs instead of the latest run. In which case, it makes it even more impressive to me that they were able to match it up as well with the GFS and European runs from late today. Here's the U.S. satellite view, and you've got Dorian visible here, well east of the Florida coast, and you see that eye that forms. You can also see that disturbed weather with lower pressures aloft and eventually at the surface. That's in the eastern Gulf of Mexico down into the northwest Caribbean. That's moving westward. That feature, I think, is going to have impact on the ultimate track. We've got a cold front coming through here in the northeast that has very little with it other than a few patchy clouds. And out in parts of the Midwest, we are seeing some heavier cloud cover with some scattered showers and thunderstorms going on today. There's another dry air mass that's setting up in the western lakes that's coming in to the northeast for this weekend. So at least from the standpoint of the eastern part of the United States this weekend, there's really not going to be a whole lot that's going on for the Labor Day holiday weekend. Weather's going to be relatively tame, and certainly up my way, in eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, we've got a beautiful day coming up for tomorrow. So I'm going to come into the chat board. Let's talk a little bit, then we'll jump back and we'll look at the hurricane centers. We'll look at the reconnaissance aircraft and see what they have found so far today. Let me just really quick say, Cyan Hernandez, thank you for hitting Super Chat. Scott Briller, thank you, the chairman, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. I really appreciate it. And he did remind me, tomorrow night I'll be working at WPIX TV in New York. So if you're in the New York area, you can certainly watch me there, or you can watch me online. And Awesome Gaming, thank you also for hitting Super Chat tonight. And a number of you have done that the last couple of days, and I really appreciate it very, very much. At least it gets me a few cigars for the drive home from work. 951 millibars, correct, David Schwartz, as we just looked at, and they're still there, so they're gonna make another pass in short order. What does the UCMET show? Asked James Holtz. Good question, James. I have to take a look at it off camera because I never really know whether I'm allowed to show it or I'm not allowed to show it. So I don't want to get myself into trouble. So I will describe it to you. And I'm going to go to the latest model run. Okay, hold on a second. I haven't been on this site in quite a while. Let's go to the classic. Yeah, that's the one. So I'm looking at the UK Met model, the British model from this afternoon, and it brings Dorian inland over Florida, over South Florida, probably near West Palm Beach, and then moves it north-northwestward, where the low center by Wednesday morning is actually touching the Big Bend of Florida. So the Euclid has a further south, further west look to it. From there, when we get to Thursday morning, it is sitting virtually where the GFS and the European have it. The Euclid from there takes it northeastward to about Charleston as a wrapped up, still a pretty wrapped up hurricane. So apparently it goes, takes it inland for a little further south, takes it up through Florida, further to the west, and then turns it northeastward, and then it matches up with the other ones when we get out to day 6. So, and the Euclid is the kind of model where I don't often look at it until somebody points out that it did well, and then I find that it does, occasionally it does hit home runs in certain situations. So I do like to look at it. I find it useful in the wintertime especially. It has its particular view. We also have the intermediate run of the European, which is, I believe, starting now, and I will have access to that. So for my Patreon members, look for a post probably in about an hour or so, and I'll summarize what the European has done. I won't be able to stay on the live stream for another hour. Even I can't talk for that long. But for the Patreon folks, I'll put it up. I'll put a post up about it. So at least we can get a sense of how if it's consistent with the day run. What you want to look for now is some sort of consistency. Is the European did the European model do something that is significant today? Is it onto something, or was it a one-run hiccup? Because we'll go to the next run overnight, and it winds up going back to something that it had before. So for those of you, by the way, who are interested, my Patreon platform is a subscription platform with a lot more weather, live streams, videos, etc., and it's just $2 a month. So I put the link up there for you. Shameless self-promotion, I know, but why not? Is it the Pugmaster? I really think we can throw out the possibility of the hurricane crossing Florida and going straight across into the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think that that's going to happen in this scenario. There's too much weakness in the upper flow in the east. If the ridge in the Atlantic and the ridge that's out in the southwest would have connected in some way and built strongly in an east-west fashion, yes, then maybe we could talk about it going into the Gulf and going west across the Gulf. But we don't have a strong ridge. We don't have a strong upper high sitting across the Gulf states right now that would be the driver of a system to move across the Gulf of Mexico from east to west. With Dorian slowing down and more time over water, Cat 5 possible, asked Johnny Quest. I think, given the fact that we're seeing it deepen rapidly, we're probably just about at a Cat 4 now. So could it take the next step up and get to a Cat 5 between now and, say, by the time it gets to the Bahamas? I think it's entirely possible that it could. Now, will it hold on to that? I would say that the fact that if it slows down to a crawl, especially as it approaches the Florida coast, I think it would be highly unlikely that it would hold on to that strength as it approaches Florida. Andrew did, because Andrew, if I remember correctly, was moving at a decent clip, maybe about 16, 17 miles an hour when it was moving inland over Florida. It didn't come in crawling, nor did Hurricane Camille back in 1969 in Biloxi Gulfport. It was moving at almost 20 miles an hour, so that the circulation going over land didn't really have a whole lot of time to feel impact, so that the center was able to make landfall with a pressure of 905 millibars and 185 mile-an-hour winds. So the motion, the actual speed, the speed, the movement of the hurricane, it would actually be more favorable for a storm to achieve Category 5 status and hold it, were it to be moving at a faster rate of speed, approaching a coastline as opposed to a slower one. Ellen Abraham from Alaska, thank you so much. And I did see after the the live stream was done last night that you hit Super Chat, and I didn't get a chance to say thank you for last night. Thank you for last night, and thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really, really appreciate it. And you've had some summer up there, by the way, with a lot of record highs that were set. And it's for a cat tree, but I guess you haven't been on for a while. But my cat was passed away. It'll be almost 2 years now, come December. Those of you who used to watch me back a couple of years ago and used to see my cat walk across in the live streams, but he got diabetes. He was only 10 years old, and we tried, but it just wasn't working. And he went from being 20 pounds to almost 4 pounds in a matter of about 2 months. He lost so much weight so quickly. He was a great cat. If you have, usually people that don't like cats, because they always see other people's cats. When it's your cat, cats are just great pets and great. They're great. They're a lot of fun. And mine was more like a dog than anything else. Okay, so just running here. Frank Russ says you'd like this thing to move 30 miles more east before it's on your doorstep. Well, hey, look, if it really slows down to a crawl and you get that short wave to the north is strong enough to create enough of a weakness, it's not impossible that you could see this thing starting to turn northward even sooner and keeping it a bit further offshore. That is not an impossible scenario. It's as much there's just as much a possibility of it being a little bit more to the east on the next run as it is to be a little bit more to the west. And the Hurricane Center in their discussion really, acknowledges the large uncertainty that continues to exist at this stage of the game. Peter, weathermodels.com should have intermediate euro for a fee. The European there's very little that's available publicly for free. What is available for free, I'm able to show, but not able to show the maps to you. I can just describe them to you. Hang on one second, folks. I'm going to. We should have the intermediate advisory from the Hurricane Center coming up shortly. So let's see what they say on that one. And they do 125 miles an hour. So almost a Category 4 here, getting very close with additional strengthening expected. 25.3 north, 71.0 west. And that is 400 miles east of the northwestern Bahamas, 575 miles east of, West Palm Beach, Florida. 950 millibars, as we saw with the reconnaissance aircraft, moving west-northwest now, or 300 degrees at about 10 miles an hour. As long as it's moving, the longer it stays moving at a clip of about 10 miles an hour or so, the further west it is going to get. So we're going to probably be able to pick up various clues along the way with respect to where Dorian is going to ultimately wind up. All right, I'm going to just really quick, I'm going to have to do this off camera again, folks, so bear with me. I'm going to try to pull up, if I can. I don't know how much of the intermediate European is up, and it doesn't go out to 240 hours, but it'll go out far enough for our purposes. We really only need to see it up to about 96 at this point, because I'm more focused on where. What the story is going to be with regards to Florida before I'm going to worry about what happens upstream down later this week if it winds up moving northward toward the Carolinas. We'll start to deal with that over the weekend. I think we first have to resolve if and where the landfall is going to be, and possibly even if there's going to be a landfall if it winds up recurving further east of the Florida East Coast. And yeah, I'm not seeing it here in yet so far. So just looking one other place. Nope, not out yet. So we're just going to have to wait and see a little later on. Again, for the Patreon folks, if I do get it, I will put something up for you on the Patreon platform. At least give you an idea of what that 18Z European run is doing. All right, let's come back to the chat board. If you guys, I'm trying to scroll back through the chat because I know there's always a lot of questions here, and I don't want to skip any of them. So rolling back here. David Giannotti, welcome, by the way. With the slow speed and copious amounts of rain, what will tornado threat be inland? Well, if you bring the center of the storm inland, then yeah, I wouldn't at all be surprised. Sometimes these tropical systems can produce a lot of tornadoes. There have been a few over the years that have been became more known for their tornadoes that they produced when they made landfall, and less perhaps of regarding whatever strength that they were coming in. So under certain circumstances, certainly you could get tornadic development, and Florida in particular is susceptible to this sort of thing. Texas is another spot where you oftentimes see you can see a lot of tornadoes with tropical systems coming in. Thank you so much, Seth Dominus. I really appreciate the kind words. We don't do weather fantasy here, and that's a good message to tell everybody else. Don't get sidetracked in a lot of the weather fantasy that is out there. Again, go to reputable sources. Serena S., I know you mentioned, as you were talking about Fort Lauderdale, with regards to flooding, and you've got these new moon high tides that are going to be occurring too, that will add to tidal flooding and storm surge. And again, I'm not really familiar with how the tidal flooding plays out by you, so you better check locally, certainly, with the impact, because even if the storm goes in north of you, with a northerly wind or a northwest wind, you get situations where the water drains down in the intercoastal waterway and causes flooding from north to south. That happened up in Jacksonville, where you had flooding that came in on the northerly wind and was record flooding in some places. Some beaches in the cone have sand dunes for protection. Some in the cone have erosion, and they bring in sand that would wash it away. There's all sorts of coastal changes that have taken place over the years with some of the hurricanes. Matthew had a big impact on the Florida coast with regards to the tidal flooding that it caused. Recon check, because we're coming up now on 8 o'clock. The plane is going back in for a second pass. My last plot here is actually from 3 minutes ago. I don't see a center print, but there might be places where the actual reconnaissance report, the numerical report, is available on the Hurricane Center's website. If you go to Data Tools and then scroll down to Aircraft Reconnaissance and then click on Vortex Data Message, you can actually bring it up. And theirs is from, actually, this is the one that produced 951 millibars, and this was at 21 minutes after 7. So they went with 950 in the advisory. So obviously they're seeing, they see it raw as they're coming in, and then it goes out. Max flight level wind 116 knots. So that would translate to probably about, they do a little reduction there. I forgot what the percentage is that they reduce it down to, but they're carrying 125, which I think is fair considering the pressure that you have, and it seems to be still on this strengthening mode. Okay, so I think that's it. I'm worn out as we come up to the top of the hour. Erica Baker, I left you a couple of reports on your Facebook page that may have something to do with Dorian. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'm going to take a look at that and forthwith as soon as I also get myself a little bit of something to eat and a drink of water. All right, everybody, have a great evening. Once again, let me just say thank you to, Ad Roy Wilson. Thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Ellen Abraham from Alaska, thank you so much. JB Goth, thank you. Cyan Hernandez, Scott Briller, the chairman, and Awesome Gaming, also one of our regulars here, semi-regular. Thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. And we had a nice crowd on the live stream. So let me tell you what the schedule is going to be this weekend, because tomorrow I'm going to be working at WPIX tomorrow evening, so I won't be able to live stream tomorrow evening. However, what I plan to do is I will live stream tomorrow morning I'm going to shoot for 11 o'clock Eastern time. So I'll do a midday live stream. There also will be a Weather in 5 tomorrow morning for which I usually do, and I usually get that done between 8 and 9 o'clock, and I'll put that up on YouTube. I'll do a live stream at 11 o'clock Eastern time here. And for Patreon members, I'll do a Weather in 10, sometime between the Weather in 5 and the live stream. So everybody will get their video tomorrow. Plus there will be regular posts, except for the time that I'm spending in the car if I decide to drive into the city, to New York City tomorrow, or if I decide to take the railroad, it'll be more like about a 2 or 2.5 hour window where I won't be posting anything on the websites or on Facebook or on the Patreon platform. So once again, thanks everybody for being here. The Patreon link is up on the chat for those of you who are interested, and it's a subscription platform. It's just $2 a month, and you get a lot of extra weather. So if you're weather geeky, and there's a really good crowd on there, and they're very active, so you can get involved with that too if you like to get involved in conversation with other weather people. It works quite well. Have a great evening, everybody, and a great Labor Day holiday weekend. And we will also, by the way, I will live stream Sunday night as well. So we'll carry you through all weekend long. Good night, everybody.